First on film and entertainment, what a week it has been. Cruel Intentions is back in town. Melbourne Theatre Company, a tour de force single performance, which I'm going to be talking to you about, and more superheroes. Well, one of them is Greg King. How are you, mate?
I'm good.
Have you ever put on a Superman cape? I mean,
I think I put kryptonite in my jocks early on.
And Peter Krause, the man who loves dress up. Now, superheroes and Peter Krause, you cannot use one without the other in the same sentence, can you?
Oh, they are mutually exclusive. Thank you.
And the man who has gone to see Cruel Intentions more than anybody I know, 11 times, I believe, Dave Griffiths. Is that right?
That is correct, and it's back in Melbourne once again. So
it is mighty. It is the best version yet, and we'll talk about that as the morning progresses. But first up, we've got to talk about a movie which is, well, the third installment of the series. Started in 2015, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. So I was wondering, what's Quantumania all about? Well, it's about the quantum realm. And in case people don't know what the quantum realm is, well, this is a secret universe beneath Earth. And there are all sorts of terrors there. So you've got to concentrate on Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, which is this movie, 124 minutes in length, M-rated. It's kind of like The Ridiculous Meeting the Preposterous. I still thought it was a lot of fun, if somewhat lame. That's kind of my pen pal description of it. And I mentioned Ant-Man in 2015. Then there was Ant-Man and the Wasp. That was 2018. And Quantumania, quite the roller coaster ride. You got Scott Lang, a.k.a. Ant-Man, played again by Paul Rudd, happily married to Hope Van Dyne, otherwise known as the Wasp, Evangeline Lilly. He can't believe how his life has changed since he became a superhero. He's constantly recognised, even if he's confused with other more popular cartoon figures. And he's just released a book, seems to be comfortable just coasting. Not so his daughter Cassie, played by Catherine Newton, who has to be bailed out of prison after she steps in for what she perceives to be a worthwhile cause. And Cassie has inherited her father's superpowers, so she can go smaller or she can go larger. She implores her dad to help right wrongs and not just sit idly by signing and reading out from his book. So that all of this comes out at a pleasant evening meal with a family, also attended by Hope's mother, Janet, Michelle Pfeiffer, and father, Dr. Hank Pym, Michael Douglas. While Dr. Pym has been working to utilise the industrious property of ants, Cassie has been playing with the quantum realm. There we go back to Quantumania. That horrifies Janet Van Dyne, who's seen enough in that secret universe, and then flash, suddenly all five are catapulted there and a real fight begins. They are, of course, keen to find their way back to San Francisco, but it's clear that Janet's been keeping her associations with the quantum realm secret. And before long, the Langs and Van Dynes have to confront the evil that lurks in this universe. He's known as Kang the Conqueror, played by Jonathan Majors. He's looking for revenge after being banished. To that end, destruction on a massive scale is a byproduct. He has no compunction about engineering. Quantumania, written by Jeff Loveness, a lot going on here, and it takes concentration to ensure no threads are missed and determine just who fits in where. Humour is an integral ingredient in the offering, and to that end, Lang is in for a shock when he's confronted by an adversary he thought he had eliminated. Now known as MODOK, Darren Cross, played by Corey Stoll, was rescued by Kang and is now simply an inflated head with tiny limbs and a few tricks up his sleeve. Try as MODOK does, no one takes him too seriously. He's sort of the butt of many jokes here. So that's Quantumania. Dave, let's start with you here. Paul Rudd, there was one scene that I thought, well, he sounded too forced, but he sort of continues to present that endearing character as he shrinks and grows as required. What did you think of the movie?
Yeah, I wasn't that impressed with this one, to be honest. I thought that a lot of what we saw in the quantum realm we've seen before in films like Journey to the Center of the Earth, Strange World last year. there are a lot of scenes in there that when I watched them, I was like, well, I've already seen this scene in Star Wars, or I saw it in John Carter, or even Green Lantern out of the own Marvel universe. The DC universe. It just did not feel like this was a film that had any other reasoning of being in the Marvel universe other than to introduce Kang the Conqueror. And Jonathan Majors' performance was the only thing that kind of saved the film. The other big criticism that I have, and a few people have said this to me, was it rested very, very heavily on the TV series of Loki. So if you haven't seen Loki and that introduction to Kang, and also the quantum realm in itself, you could be a little bit lost. But I just called this a filler film for Marvel. It just feels like it was there to fill the void that they needed to get that next jump to have Kang the Conqueror come in. Luckily, Jonathan Majors saved the film because there was so much else that was disappointing. Bill Murray and his character of Lord Krayla were massively underused. Catherine Newton, I suppose you could say, was a big plus, and hopefully we see more of Cassie in the future. But yeah, I think this is one of Marvel's weaker films.
And yet Peyton Reed was still in the director's chair as he was for the first two. So I agree with Catherine Newton. I mean, I thought she brought some rebelliousness and spark to her role as Cassie. And, Jonathan Majors, largely restrained menace. That's how I describe his role in the piece. What did you think, Peter? Was it something that interested you even vaguely?
Not at all. In fact, the first Ant-Man film was not bad. It had some amusing moments in it, some good writing for Paul Rudd and for the whole storyline, and even Michael Douglas, who at that first film was given some amusing lines. But this film is a washout for me. It is just cliche-driven. It's based on the idea that throw as much CGI, as much special effects at the audience, and hope they don't notice how lame and how poor the storyline is. And I was not impressed at all. In fact, it's nice to see some Australian visual effects people were involved in the film, but the film itself is just awful. And I would like to see a return to the earlier Marvel films that at least were a bit more original, had a story that had some gravitas to it, and had characters that might have had a sense of humour or might have had something about it. In this film, Quantumania, it is so cliche-driven that I was bored solid by it. So very disappointing film.
Well, I mean, look, I thought the visual effects and CGI were appropriate given where the film was going, quite effective in terms of plot development. But, did we really need to see talking broccoli, Greg King?
No, I don't even like to eat broccoli, so I don't want it talking back at me. But I'm with what everyone else has said about this film. I thought it was a bit of a mess, actually, and it wastes the talents of Michael Douglas, who Peter said, he was really good in the first film. He comes across here, he plays sort of like a king of the ants here. I also wasted Michelle Pfeiffer's talents. I thought it's overloaded on special effects there. There's a visual spectacular there, but it becomes overbearing at times and you get lost in it. The story was messy and complicated, and as Dave pointed out, you have to have seen some of these other TV shows in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and that to be able to get your head around who these characters are and where they're going. This is intended to introduce Phase 5 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it just
How many phases are there, Greg?
I've got no idea, and I don't really care at this stage. It seems as though the writer here has seen Star Wars a few too many times, probably as many times as Dave has seen Cruel Intentions, by the sound of things. A lot of references to other movies there, lots of cliches there. You can see a lot of influences on the film, but for me, it didn't really hang together again. The two saving graces for me were Paul Rudd, who's got a genial presence as Scott Lang there, brings a lot of humour to the role, and you've already mentioned Jonathan Majors, who is the villain, a cliched over-the-top villain nonetheless, but he does bring a sense of menace and sort of one of the better things about this film. But for me, no, it shows what's bad about Marvel.
Just one thing that I was curious. Michelle Pfeiffer was the original Wasp, wasn't she? I mean, she's, if you look at the sort of CVs on this, there's two credited with the Wasp, which I thought was rather interesting. Can one of you explain that to me?
Yeah, she was the Wasp that back in when Michael Douglas was Ant-Man, and then she disappeared into the quantum realm, and then years later, their daughter picked up the suit and wore it for the first time.
Fair enough. All right. So I'm not expecting magnificent scores. I mean, look, I suppose, yeah, I thought there was certainly lame bits and things that didn't hang together. No question about that. The plot's a real stretch. But then, unfortunately, Peter, I think you nailed it. That's become par for the course for superhero films. You look at the original, whether it be Ant-Man or you go back to some of the really strong superhero films, and it's been a while since I've seen one that's really excited me. Nevertheless, I mean, look, I just accepted it on face value. I didn't expect much out of it, and I probably went in there with the right attitude. So I'll probably end up giving it a higher score than the rest of you. I'm giving it a 6, so I'll start off. Who else is going to pass it? Anybody?
Barely. I'm giving it a 5.
Yeah. Okay. So Greg.
Look, I think still Spider-Man is the best films in the Marvel canon there, and the strongest films. This one, 4.5 to 5 for me, and that's about it, and that's overly generous.
Yeah, well, I mean, the original Iron Man was fantastic too, I thought. Yeah, I mean, that's another example. Okay, so Peter, I expected you to be low score on this, so I'm correct, I presume. Go for it. What are you giving it?
You're certainly correct. I couldn't pass this film. 4 out of 10.
Yeah, all right. So, it's somewhere in that realm, and I mean, I suppose that there are going to be some people. It was interesting. I had a clash on the opening media night, so I ended up seeing Women Talking, which we will talk about. But notwithstanding that, when I went to see it in cinema, there were quite a few people there. So, I mean, they wouldn't be making these unless they get bums on seats. It doesn't make them good films, but it makes them, I'm not sure how this is going to do in the box office. Pete, what's your view on it?
Well, the early word I've read already from Variety is that it's going to do very well indeed. People are clamouring to see these films.
Yeah, so given all of that, I mean, it's sad in a sense because, when you've seen some really good superhero movies, you long for a bit more originality, etc. And the plots seem to just replicate one another. That's the other aspect. And they're always trying to do bigger and brighter. And this is where CGI and special effects tend to take over. And let's be honest, unless you've got a decent plot and you've got some quirks and things that are a little bit different, if you see a lot of movies, it'll become same as.
I was just going to say, the reason I think these movies have such a big audience is the great Jim Shembry said to me the other day, there's a generation of people out there that don't know life without a Marvel movie now. Like even my nephew, for example, he loves the Marvel universe, and that's because he's grown up with a Marvel film coming out every few months. So it's just a thing now that when a new Marvel film comes out, that generation go to see it.
Yeah, understand. I wish they'd be seeing, well, maybe they are, but I wish they'd be seeing a bit more quality product out there as well. Talking about quality, let's talk about Women Talking. You are on J-Air 88 FM. This is an M-rated 104-minute in length movie. And even though it's a work of fiction, it's termed an act of female imagination, the starting point for Women Talking is what happened in the recent past. And I'm referring to events that took place on the Manitoba colony, which is a remote and isolated Christian community. They're known as Mennonites, and that's in Bolivia. So between the years 2005 and 2009, more than 100 girls and women in the colony awoke to discover that they'd been raped in their sleep. How horrible. And the backdrop is that a group of men from the colony was spraying an animal anesthetic into their victims' houses to render them unconscious. The movie is based on the 7th novel by a Canadian writer called Miriam Toews, which was published in 2018. It centered around a secret meeting in a hayloft of 8 women from the colony who have to decide on behalf of the other women how to react to the traumatic events which I just talked about. Importantly, time's on the hop. They've only got 48 hours to reach a decision before the colony men, who are away to post bail for the rapists, return. The film is actually set in 2010. written by Sarah Polley and Toes, really skillfully directed by Sarah Polley. It's a searing indictment of men, violent, controlling, and manipulative men. And it's a film that drip feeds information to form the full picture of why these women have been pushed to the point that they are. And they've basically got to make one of three decisions. And that's what the whole film is all about. Do they stay? Do they go? Do they do nothing? What do they end up doing? So they fear the consequences of leaving, of never again being able to see the children left behind, and of turning their backs to God, because this is a God-fearing colony or community. They also, though, fear the consequences of staying, of more violence, of more control and manipulation. As I see it, it's mighty powerful, slow-moving, but it's a small audience film, Peter.
Definitely. In fact, the storyline, the writing, and the direction, of course, as well as the performances, are just absolutely superb, and based on that novel that you referred to. It has so much prescience in terms of the situation that women find themselves in when they're caught in a violent situation or relationship, whether they stay or whether they leave. And there's so much developed in this film, which I was very impressed by. No wonder the screenplay has been Oscar nominated. It's also interesting to note the issue of the Mennonite community that it's based on. This idea of religious cults or groups that have power over people, and in this case, power over women, and how you're sort of trapped and unclear about what to do. It's nice to see a positive male performance in the film, as in Ben Whishaw, who does a very good job as the teacher.
Excellent job. And I mean, it's interesting. It's a film about women, but the sensitivity that he brings to the role is really what stands out.
And the way the film is shot, the desaturation of the film, so that the color grading almost, but it doesn't quite go to black and white, is very impressive. And there's always been comments about films that are largely set in a single setting, and I had no problem with this being highly cinematic. Sarah Polley, who did Stories We Tell, is so good at telling stories, and she tells them so well in this cinematic environment.
This could be a play, though, Peter, as well. I mean, because you don't need a lot to tell the story, and I could see this on stage. Could you not?
Yes, possibly, but I think it's important to have the camera movements, the close-ups, the cutaways, etc., that are in the film to give it, I think, extra strength in terms of the storyline. And the other thing I found amusing and interesting in this film, not that there's a lot to be amused about in the film, is the use of the song Daydream Believer, which is sort of a 60s sort of throwback, Monkeys and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also this idea of let's believe in something hopeful and positive to move forward and to find something better in life. So, look, a very impressive film, very well written, and I certainly highly recommend it.
You talked about the lighting. That really struck me as well, really evocative. Think about the shards of light entering the hayloft. I mean, that just magnificently captured. And I thought, even though we're talking about 2010, the soundtrack really stood out. There's so much about this. It's really well considered. It's a really very well developed script. The performances of all of the women, 3 generations, the fine cinematography, all of those elements sort of band together, don't they, Greg? Really good film.
I haven't seen this one yet. I had, like you, I had the choice between this and Ant-Man on the preview night, and I went and saw Ant-Man. I haven't had a chance to catch up with this one yet.
Good on you. Well, what about you? In terms of great films, Dave, I would have thought this is one of them.
Oh, definitely. The power of the word. I said in my written review that there are very few films out there that can bring suspense to the screen using words, but this film does that because you're on edge all of the time. You want to know what these women are going to decide and how they're going to decide it. A few people have said to me they don't want to see this film because they've heard that it's so dialogue heavy, but I actually think that that's the power of this film. It's such a brilliant screenplay. It reminds me of the suspense that I got from a very, very rare cult film, I think from the late 1980s, called The Ice House, starring Melissa Gilbert, where it was a young boy sitting in a room confronting the woman that had taken his virginity. And it was such an amazing film, even though it was just in that one setting. And this film went back to that as well. Interestingly enough, in the novel, Peter mentioned the soundtrack and the use of Daydream Believer. In the novel, it was actually California Dreaming by the Mamas and the Papas that was used. And that was because it was supposed to be that these women are dreaming of breaking out of that society and getting to somewhere like California. That's the pinnacle of life kind of thing. So, yeah, it was interesting that they made that decision to change that. And I'd love to know whether it was an artistic decision or whether or not they just couldn't get the rights to the Mamas and Papas.
Yes.
Yeah.
With one thing, I mean, I thought in terms of performance, wow, Claire Foy as Salome, really forceful. Every reason to be. Of course, her characters, past and present, are horrific, and in fact, that's the truth of all these women and their offspring. I thought that the other, I mean, Rooney Mara is amongst the most accommodating of the women as owner, and she's also, you know, in a situation that she's been set upon, and I'm not going to spoil the surprise for people who have not seen it, but she's not out to offend, she's not out to push buttons, but she still manages to do that. So there are some very, very strong performances. It's really an ensemble of actors who fill the primary roles, and I didn't think there was a misstep amongst them. And really, they're fiery, they're strong, they're vulnerable, they're apologetic. They clash frequently. The clashes are quite vitriolic. And the other one I wanted to comment on, Frances McDormand, she plays only a really small role as Scarface Jans, but as always, I just found her enormously impactful. She doesn't have to say anything. Her ashen face speaks volumes, Dave, doesn't it? I mean, the presence that she has looms large in every film she's in.
She does, and I think she is almost one of the key characters in this, in a sense, even though she's not in it for very long, because she's the first one that's kind of adamant that we're not leaving, where I think that was needed, because this could very easily have become a film where the women were all in accordance with each other kind of thing, and that would have taken away the suspense. I think having her character there was so important. Frances McDormand was also a producer on this film as well, so I guess that's one of the reasons why she wanted to have a part in it. But yeah, it's amazing how many of these characters, when you look back at the film, only have small roles, but they're so important to the storyline at the end of the film. I think that is really, really unique. Quite often with cinema these days, all of the action takes part around the major players. This film really is an ensemble performance. I really wish that they had some of those awards that they used to give to ensembles, because this one,
I agree with you.
Down.
Look, the one thing I would say is that it is, you've got to be patient, because it could have been shortened somewhat. It's not a long film as such. I mentioned 104 minutes, but it takes place primarily in this hayloft, and it could have moved a tad faster, in my opinion, but that may have detracted from the overall impact, because the overall impact is huge. It's heart-wrenching. It really is an insightful piece of movie making, and it does leave an indelible impression. So let's get some scores. We'll start with you, Peter.
Very impressive film. I think for ensemble, it's nominated at the SAG Awards. Women Talking, yes, it is, for the film cast. So it's nice to see that. Look, very impressive film, 9 out of 10.
Dave?
Yeah, 9 out of 10 for me as well.
And 8 out of 10 for me. We are talking first on film and entertainment. You are listening to Gregory King, to Dave Griffiths, and to Pete Krause, and myself, Alex First. Now, I want to talk about on J-Air, spoiler alert. This is a 112-minuter, M-rated, and as the title suggests, the outcome is writ large at the start of this movie. It's based on a best-selling memoir by Michael Osiello, and it's a 13-year love story between a couple of guys. And Jim Parsons plays Osiello. He's a really sensitive journo who writes about TV shows. And as a child, he dreamt of a sitcom with him at the centre of it and his family filling the other roles. He's a hard worker as a journo. He's someone driven by his job, hardly a social butterfly. And then one day, a flamboyant gay colleague invites him to join him at a bar, and he initially turns him down. but then Osceola begrudgingly agrees. And that's when he sets eyes upon a photographer called Kit Cowan, played by Ben Aldridge, who is muscular and assured. They're very different, this pair, but the chemistry between them is unmistakable. The film showcases their resulting relationship that came out of that face-to-face meeting at the bar, complete with highs and lows. After Cowan is briefly hospitalised, Osceola meets Cowan's parents. They are not aware that their sons are homosexual, but far greater hurdles lie ahead. It combines heart and humour. It's quite an emotional, quite an affecting journey. The harsh reality of the story brings with it extra bite and power. The director's Michael Showalter. He did The Big Sick, and he ensures that the movie is imbued with pathos. Really well composed by writers David Marshall Grant and Dan Savage, from a book by Osceola titled Spoiler Alert, The Hero Dies. I really appreciated the nuance, the quirks that Parsons brought to bear in the movie. He introduces Osceola as a person who really does care deeply. And Ben Aldridge, he comes across as somewhat of a devilish charmer, much more of a player than Osceola. But I really thought the scene stealer was Sally Field. We don't see a lot of her these days, but she plays Cowan's mum, Marilyn, effervescent, a hyperactive chatterer, and I thought she really did shine in her characterisation, Greg.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Sally Field in this film too. I thought she was really good there. But I like the storyline too, and how the relationship between the two men developed over time there. I thought this was a really nice performance from Jim Parsons, who's always been sort of stuck in that sort of role of Sheldon, you know, from The Big Bang Theory. And even his role in Hidden Figures had much of that same mystique here. So it's nice to see him actually break out and to do something a little bit different here. I saw him on stage in New York in The Boys in the Band 5 years ago.
You? Okay.
Yeah. Along with Zachary Quinto and Matt Bomer. So, you know, it was really good there. But yeah, I like the film. I like the trajectory, and the fact that you know that one of the characters in the relationship is going to die at the start, I think just sets up that expectation and tension in the story as you watch the relationship develop.
I was worried about
then you share that sort of
heartbreak. Mate, I was a bit worried about that. I that's the one bit that I mean, because I understand the book gives everything away. And the film is not, you know, doesn't give away the hero dies kind of thing. But I just think it would have been a better film without knowing that. And, you know, you could form your own opinion as you went along the way. That troubled me somewhat.
Didn't trouble me. It was sort of like a little prologue to get you into the story, and then you go back and develop the story, and you knew the relationship, and it set it up beautifully, I thought.
Okay. What about you, Peter?
Yeah, I had no problem with that idea as well. The hero dies at the start, and then we get the trajectory of the story as it develops from their first meeting. I really liked the way Showalter has directed this film. As you said, he directed The Big Sick and The Eyes of Tammy Faye. So he's a very astute director, and I like the way that they used distancing effects in this film so that you don't feel the tragic melodrama as strongly as you would if it had been will he or won't he die sort of storyline. So
I'm sorry, when you say distancing effects, what are we talking about in particular?
Well, a good example is there's a scene in the hospital where we suddenly pull back and we have all the cameras, we have this sort of fantasy element where there is this idea that maybe this is not happening, that sort of thing. So, and there are a few other distancing effects, some lines here and there. I mean, Sally Field is excellent, but I think the only disappointment for me was not seeing the real Michael Osceola. I would have liked to have seen him at the end of the film so that we at least had a context for the real character. The other thing, with the distancing effect, I also remembered the film Bros, of course, Billy Eichner's starring role, where he used savage humour and over-the-top humour to distance from the more underlying tragedy or difficulties or problems in his life. No, I really like Spoiler Alert. I think it's very well done, and it's interesting to see Ben Aldridge, who is also on screen at the moment at Knock at the Cabin. So he's getting some good roles as well. So, yes, I like the film overall.
And one other thing it reminded me of was a film called Long Time Companion from the late 80s with Steve Buscemi there, which dealt with the love story against the backdrop of the AIDS pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing a lot more sort of mainstream product that's sort of got a gay theme, and yeah, that's great. I mean, that's society, and perhaps we're no longer as timid about putting this subject matter, which should never have been sort of kept in the closet, dare I say, out on the big screen, and that's the way it should be, Dave, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. The thing I did find with this film is I thought that the relationship starting at the start between Michael and Kit, I actually found that really natural. The writing there was absolutely sensational, but I felt that fell away a little bit towards the end. The interesting part for Jim Parsons is I actually thought that this was a strange choice for him because the character was similar to Sheldon. He had this way of looking at life through television shows. He had this OCD obsession with Smurfs and things like that. There was some big similarities there actually between Sheldon and Michael. But my biggest flaw with this movie was I felt that the writing kind of fell away towards the end, which is funny because the ending did have me in tears, especially with some lines that come from Kit's parents. But I just found that at times towards after the time jump in this film, some of the dialogue felt very Days of Our Lives, Young and the Restless. It didn't seem to have that natural flow that the dialogue had early on in the film. So I think that kind of dampened it a little bit for me. But up until that point, I loved this film. I didn't mind the fact that we knew the ending because, as I said a few weeks ago with the What's Love Got to Do with It, you knew the ending of that film as well, but it was the journey that got you there that made it special. The same for this film as well.
So what would you give it out of 10?
I gave it a 6 out of 10.
A 6 out of 10, okay. So Dave's 6. I think you'll be higher, Greg. Go for it.
Yeah, and I really like that touch of Jim Parsons' character and his obsession with the Smurfs. I thought that just was a nice, quirky touch to his character there.
Well,
I'm going to give it
sorry,
7.
7. I was going to say to you, I mean, do you collect anything, Greg? Is there anything you particularly...
I collect booklets from concerts and plays I go to, collect CDs and all that kind of stuff, but that's about it.
Okay, sorry, what was the first one? I spoke over you. Say that again.
All the programs and...
the programs, yeah.
All the concerts I've been to.
Yeah, And likewise, I mean, I like collecting theatre programs, and I find that obviously it's useful when I'm doing the reviews anyway. What do you collect, Dave?
Pop culture and sporting memorabilia.
Which again, it dovetails beautifully into what you do and what we all do, which is fantastic. Peter, do you collect race cars, or what do you do?
Yes, AFL footy cards. No.
Peter.
Yeah, so I can rip them up.
The Sir James Hird card is worth more than any other. Yes. What do you collect anything?
Well, actually, I try and collect some rare Blu-rays or DVDs of films that are very rarely seen or have extra components to them.
And do you get them in Australia or you get them abroad?
Both.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, I mean, gee, that must be interesting. So you obviously have some places that you can turn to, but how do you determine what you are going to sort of look for? Is it a movie you've seen or a movie you've heard about or what?
It is a mixture of that, and also I try and find rare silent films and early sound films that have been restored or have had a 4K version attached to them and extra information and so on, extras that are usually very useful.
What's the most valuable to you, or the rarest, if you like, in your collection? And we may never have heard of it, but there you go.
Well, you probably have. When I was in Germany, I picked up the complete version of Metropolis, which has a booklet in it, which has about 6 or 7 long interviews and other information about the making of the film. Some real rarities there. So I suppose that might be the rarest I have.
And Greg, in terms of programs that you've collected, what's the one that I suppose you hold dearest to your heart?
Oh God,
Is there one or not really?
Not really. It's just a good way of remembering some some of the benefits.
Okay, no, I just thought, may have been somebody who's no longer performing or no longer with us or whatever it might be. That's the
there's a couple of them. There's a couple of them in that collection.
And
like Meatloaf and
Meatloaf would be a good example. Mind you, I don't think there was a program for the MCG performance at the grand final, was there, Greg? There was a grand final program.
It's called The Record, but you didn't get anything to commemorate Robbie Williams' fantastic performance there. Just the memory in my head.
Exactly, yeah. And Dave, you've got lots of stuff. So what's your prized possession?
My prized possession is actually a film cell from the Fast and Furious franchise that was signed by the cast, and Paul Walker signed it on the day that he died.
Wow. Oh my golly. Gee, that was a terrible incident. I suppose in terms of signatures and whatever, I had the good fortune to be involved in the 2000 Olympic Games. And you remember, Dave, this is me one especially for you. You remember when we had the 4x100 relay and there was the massive competition between the Australians and the Americans. And I got the sheet that determines the winners with the times, etc., signed by all the Aussie swimmers. And who was the guy who did air guitar for the Americans? But anyway, that's one of my prized possessions. But I suppose the real one I've spoken about on this program before, I've got a signed letter from Audrey Hepburn talking about how she can't stand the paparazzi from the 1950s.
Wow.
So that's really quite special. Peter, I'm sure you'd appreciate that too.
Absolutely, sounds great.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
I've got Morgan Freeman's autograph on a still from Seven.
Oh, have you really? Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm a big fan of him. I think he's a terrific actor and has been for a long period of time. And of course, he only started late. So anyway, it's interesting. It gives us a little bit of an insight. I suppose all of our minds are working similarly because of the industry that we find ourselves to be a pleasant part of. On J-Air, I wanted to talk about...
Alex, I haven't given a score yet for spoiler alert.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I apologise. Yes, and I got totally distracted. Sorry, I'm choking now on my misdemeanor. What's your score for
Miss
spoiler alert?
Who? Anyway, all right, we won't go there. Spoiler alert. I must say Jim Parsons has been doing other roles as well. You mentioned Boys in the Band, Greg, but he also was in The Normal Heart, which looked at the early days of the AIDS story and etc. So he has been breaking out of the Big Bang Theory roles. Anyway, no, I liked spoiler alert. I think it has a lot to commend it, and I gave it 7 out of 10.
7 out of 10. And Greg, did I get your score?
Yeah, I said 7 out of 10 as well.
Yeah, you as well. And Dave, I think you said 6. I'm giving a 7 out of 10 as well. I think although it's largely predictable, it does strike a chord. It deserves to find an appreciative audience, and that is spoiler alert. Now, I wanted to talk about a few movies, and guys, just to jump in if you feel like saying something. If not, then I'll just plough on. But Prima Facie at Fairfax Studio. Do any of you know anything about this? Because this has had real success. It's an Australian success story. Was written, in fact, it started out at 105 seat theatre in Sydney. It's called the Griffin. I don't know whether you've seen the Griffin, Greg, when you're in Sydney's King's Cross, but basically it started there in 2019, and it's written by a former lawyer called Susie Miller. That's her name, and then it since played to sold-out seasons in the West End, and it's now in Melbourne as part of the MTC at Fairfax Studio, and it's sold gangbusters, because it's about to open on Broadway as well. So it's a real... Had any of you heard the title, Prima Facie, in terms of any knowledge of it or not? No?
Yes, I saw the National Theatre Live screen production with Jodie Comer playing the role.
Excellent. And in fact, I after I wrote my review, I saw the review of somebody else who'd seen both and said, this blows it out of the park. Now... you've seen that one. That must have been quite something, the National Theatre Live, yeah?
It was a terrific performance, and the shades of grey of the character as she develops the story is just fantastic.
Okay, well, so that's interesting that, again, the comparison I've only seen this as a theatrical production. Tessa Ensler is played by Sheridan Harbridge, that was the role that she played in Sydney. Successful barrister. She knows the tricks of the trade. She defends her clients. Many of them are alleged sexual offenders, and she defends them vehemently. And she relishes the game. I'm talking about circling witnesses until really she's ready to pounce, having lulled them into this false sense of security. She's really good at what she does. Those who know her know how she operates and what's coming. The witnesses are therefore sort of mere lambs to the slaughter. Tessa chose law after she did particularly well at her final high school exams. And then she received a reality check when she was sitting with fellow legal wannabes for the first time at uni. She was told in no uncertain terms that many wouldn't see it through. That was never going to be the case with Tessa, though. Now she's had 11 years' experience and she's winning case after case. And even when human compassion might enter the equation for a victim, she justifies what she's doing and how she's doing it by saying to herself that she's merely adhering to the legal process. And then one fateful drunk night, everything changes. Suddenly, she becomes the victim. And life for her will never be the same again. It takes 763 days for her case to be tried. The question is, will she see justice? Now, I mentioned it's been written by a former lawyer, so the insight is really most important. And the reason it's been universally acclaimed is quickly clear when you see this production. Miller's writing, descriptive and insightful, and Sheridan Harbridge, well, she's a force of nature in 90 minutes of really compelling theatre. Just her and a chair, and yet she holds us in the palms of her hands throughout. She celebrates, she pouts, she parties, she's flirtatious, incredible, driven, highly capable, and she displays strength. And then she's shell-shocked. She's vulnerable, she's anxious, and she's alone. In a millisecond, she shifts the mood. She does so with remarkable dexterity and aplomb during the course of this performance. She transforms into Tessa. We totally believe she is her. The picture she paints is vivid, and it's also very alarming. Behind it is the need for change, and that message could not be clearer. Now, since around about middle of last year, I've been really fortunate to see 3 bravura one-woman shows, each of which have left an indelible imprint. And I should say they're 3 one-person plays. I believe they are. I hope I haven't identified them incorrectly. I believe all of them are women. There was MTC's Boys and Girls, which showcased Nikki Shields, and then there was the Picture of Dorian Gray at Arts Centre, Melbourne, featuring Erin Jean Norval. In fact, Nikki Shields was an alternate there. And now we've got this one, prima facie, with a name that is just terrific, Sheridan Harbridge. She's such a great actor. So this is directed by Lee Lewis, and it's must-see material. And by the way, the title, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with what prima facie means. Latin, of course, meaning on the first appearance. So otherwise put as a fact presumed to be true unless it's disproved. So it's obviously appropriate to what we're seeing here in terms of the legalese. So it's Fairfax Studio, Arts Centre, Melbourne, until the 25th of March. But get in early because they're already it's all but a sellout. So I would highly commend it to you. And Peter, based on what you've seen as a production on stage, which has been filmed, would you say the same thing? Did you find it compelling?
Absolutely compelling. The writing is just superb, as well as, I can only comment on Jodie Comer's performance, who was superb. So I'm sure that this actress is just as good. It's a terrific storyline.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I'd like to see this on film. As a movie, I think it could be made into a movie. It could be expanded, if you like. You could introduce other characters, and I think it could still work. Do you think so, Peter?
I'm not so sure. I think it might diffuse some of the ideas and the intensity of the story. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. Now, I want to...
Peter. Alex, you mentioned the Griffin Theatre in King's Cross. The making main thing I saw when I was in King's Cross, I did a historical tour of King's Cross where all the famous, you learn about the history of the place and some of the famous people like Peter Finch that lived there, and they point out some of the places that no longer exist that were part of King's Cross notorious history.
I was a bit worried where you were going there, that because you started off with the main thing I saw in King's Cross, and there would have been all sorts of things that I could have put in there, Greg. But yes, I remember.
That's how your mind works. That's how your mind works, Alex.
Exactly. Thank you very much. I did a tour underneath the sewers of Melbourne. What does that say about me, Greg?
Well, we live in an affluent society.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. I also saw Nosferatu at Maryland Theatre at the Malthouse during the week. Now, talking about silent movies, you must have seen the original Nosferatu, 1922, I think, the German expressionist film, Peter.
Absolutely, I was there at the launch.
Yes, I'm not surprised. I'm not going to say you look like death warmed up. Now, I'm just wondering, Dave, have you seen that original film?
I have, yes, yep, and they had it just recently at Monsterfest again.
Ah, very good. Yeah, and I've seen it as well. Greg, you've patronised it too?
Yeah, I've seen it, and a couple of other silent films from that era, like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which we did at school.
Yes, exactly. Well, look, this play, it's a reworking of Nosferatu, a very modern reworking. And it starts, imagine this, with this heartfelt warning from one of the characters that only tragedy puts you on the map. And then there's a plea to save ourselves as audience members, as it's too late for her. And that rings out as well. Now, that's the start of a tale of an unremarkable mining town in Tasmania beset by evil, and it's called Blue Water. And after a checkered history, it's now struggling to survive as a town. The land's been poisoned. Investors are desperately needed for the mine to have any hope of continuing. And the job of finding them is left to Tom, Keegan Joyce, and also Knock, Max Brown. And Knock is the town's mayor, who happens to be attracted to the doctor, and the doctor is named Kate, played by Sophie Ross. Now, but first Tom must metaphorically wrestle with her journalist girlfriend, Ellen, played by Shamita Siva, so she doesn't spill all the details of an environmental impact report into the town and the mine and so forth. She reluctantly agrees to hold back before Tom takes off to pursue a promising investment lead in Sydney. His trip to a remote mansion surrounded by woods and shrouded in fog is anything but straightforward. And when he does arrive, he's greeted past midnight by a pale-looking, confident man who calls himself the Count. Jacob Collins Levy is that role. Fortnight later, Tom is awoken by a desperate call from his girlfriend, who has no idea what's become of him. He's disorientated. He's clearly in the grip of something beyond his reckoning. He's still with Count Orlok, who then is invited back with him to Tasmania. After further drama en route, in quick time, Orlok is putting the bite on many of Blue Water's remaining residents. So I mentioned this is a modern take on an age-old story. Well, you go back to Dracula, which goes back to 1897 and the novel by Bram Stoker. The playwright here is Kezia Warner, who admits he doesn't know much about vampires. Clearly, though, he's been sucked in, creating a dramatic. Thank you very much. I'm waiting. I'm waiting for Greg puns here, and he's created this sort of dramatic, humorous, and seductive piece of work. Now, apart from the writing and the acting, staging is everything, and it's here that the set and costume designer called Romany Harper has done remarkably well. Imagine there's a sprawling set, the backdrop of which is ceiling-to-floor red curtaining, in front of which sits six doors. So you've got the curtaining at the back and the doors in the front, and also in the room, and that's still at the back of the stage, it's a really huge stage, is this heavy boardroom table and some chairs, and the boardroom table lights up, so it can go to blood red. The mood lighting by Paul Jackson, sound from Kelly Ryle does the rest, and it's very atmospheric, Nosferatu. It immediately drew me in. It carries with it no shortage of laughs due to the surfeit of pithy one-liners, and it's also not without its surprises. I thought Collins Levy was excellent in his portrayal of this suave, controlling Count, never short of answers, and he's got this sense of comic timing, which really works well. Great sense of comedy. Also appreciated the surety in Sibba's performance as the hip journo, driven by her instincts to probe further into just what's going down. Joyce readily steps into the role as Tom, popular, flummoxed nerd, caught way out of his depth looking for investments. And Ross brings practicality and suspicion to her persona as Dr. Kate, while Brown is eager to please as the Mayor Knock. It's very creative, this Nosferatu, certainly engaging and entertaining, although I did think it dragged a tad before it reached its climax. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes could have been saved by sort of shaving it off once it was established what Count Orlok was up to in Blue Water. But the lion's share of this piece, which really is the lion's share, directed by Bridget Belotis, has a lot of spark and sizzle, and it's bloody good fun, Greg. That's what this play is all about. At the Maryland Theatre, at Malthouse Theatre, until the 5th of March, and it is called Nosferatu.
And so there you go. Bloody project becoming a pain in the neck.
Thank you, Greg. Indeed. But yeah, well done, really well done. And you step into this sort of theatre, and I don't think I've ever. The stage just takes up half the theatre. It's amazing what they've done with it. So good on Malthouse Theatre for putting it on. Now, Dave, you and I last night attended a very, very good production of Cruel Intentions. I mean, you've seen it 11 times. Where does this rate in the pantheon of productions of Cruel Intentions, in your opinion?
Yeah, I thought last night was actually one of the best performances. Having some new cast members come in for this Melbourne season has brought some new life into it. But I thought the cast were having a lot of fun last night. There were a few times when they kind of interacted with the audience. There was times when things on stage kind of leapt over to crowd reactions. There was one point in particular where I'm trying to think of her name. Kirby was using her binoculars as Catherine, the character, and handed over the crowd and went, ew, when she looked at someone. So, yeah, they were having a lot of fun last night. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are falling in love with this musical. It is such a fun musical. And for people of my age, all of the songs were our high school soundtrack when we were growing up.
The music was just magnificent. I thought this sizzled. I've seen it three times in the last sort of 9 months, and the performances are powerhouse performances, the rousing score. I mean, there was palpable excitement and anticipation in the theatre even before the metaphorical curtain rise, wasn't there? I mean, I thought that really set the scene, and then once it did, the energy, it's electrifying. It oozes with sensuality and sexuality, and it's slick. It moves along at pace. It milks the copious double entendres and the physical interaction that are inherent parts of the script. And, of course, we're talking about manipulative youngsters behaving badly, and two in particular, and it's based on the 1999 movie of the same name, which starred Sarah Michelle Gellar, Ryan Philippe, and Reese Witherspoon. So, I mean, I just thought that some of the performances here, Dave, the Kirby Burgess that you mentioned, I could not be more impressed. I mean, she's just so assured. She really capitalizes on the toxicity that's the hallmark of her character. And doesn't she blow the roof off it vocally, hey?
Oh, definitely. Kirby Burgess, Drew Weston, and Kelsey Hayes, they are the number one team in Australian theatre at the moment. They are absolutely amazing as a trio. And like I said, having new castmates around them in some of the roles, I think has actually energized them as well.
Look, it's fabulous.
I can see this.
Sarah, what's that? That Sarah, I don't know how you pronounce her surname, Krndija. She's new, and I thought she's a comic tour de force. She's this sort of innocent but eager to learn Cecile Caldwell, an absolute scream in the role. And I thought Ross Cesari really dined out on the sort of shocks of Blaine Tuttle. He's this gay guy who readily gets together with a manipulated jock. And I thought both of those were really excellent in their roles.
Oh, definitely. I can see this becoming one of those cult theatre shows that they have to bring back to Melbourne or Sydney every few years just to keep audiences happy, because someone said to me last night that for their generation, Grease was the go-to musical.
Yes.
But new generation, I think Cruel Intentions is going to be. It was a much loved film by people of my age, and the soundtrack is still one of the highest selling soundtracks of all time.
Loved it.
So
Absolutely
people
loved
love
it.
the
Yeah.
music as well.
No. Dave, we've got to go. I've overextended my welcome, but thank you very much for your insights. Folks, we'll catch you next week on First on Film and Entertainment. Thanks, boys. See you later.